The Lord be with you.
And with your spirit.
A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Luke.
Glory to you, Lord.
While the crowd was pressing in on Jesus and listening to the word of God, he was standing by the lake of Gennesaret. He saw two boats there alongside the lake. The fishermen had disembarked and were washing their nets. Getting into one of the boats, the one belonging to Simon, he asked him to put out a short distance from the shore. Then he sat down and he taught the crowds from the boat. After he had finished speaking, he said to Simon, "Put out into deep water and lower your nets for a catch." Well, Simon said in reply, "Master, we have worked hard all night and have caught nothing. But at your command, I will lower the nets." When they had done this, they caught a great number of fish, and their nets were near tearing. They signaled to their partners in the other boats to come and help them. They came and filled both boats, so that the boats were in danger of sinking. When Simon Peter saw this, he fell at the knees of Jesus and said, "Depart from me, Lord, for I am a sinful man." For astonishment at the catch of fish they had made seized him and all those with him, and likewise James and John, the sons of Zebedee, who were partners with Simon. Well, Jesus said to Simon, "Do not be afraid. From now on you will be catching men." When they brought their boats to the shore, they left everything and followed him. The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
So the question is, have you ever worked for something, worked hard and maybe a long drawn-out process and finally achieved that? Maybe it was a promotion at work. Maybe it was a new job that bettered life for you. Possibly it could have been studying for a test or an exam and seeking that better grade. Or maybe it was buying a house or buying a car or a recreational vehicle of some type. When we buy these things or when we accomplish these tasks, there's this feeling of excitement, this feeling of worth. There's also just the satisfaction of achieving. What if God now asks you to give that up for one of his requests for you? Imagine now Simon Peter, a very successful fisherman. As was revealed in the gospel, he owned his own boat. He was an owner of his own business, a business that provided a livelihood for his family and for the family of his friends and family. Quite a successful business. You can just imagine Simon Peter looking out over his boat and just the warmth and the sense of accomplishment, that sense of contentment that he had. And Jesus came along and asked him to leave that behind. Jesus entered his life. Now imagine Simon Peter now pondering this question to follow him after having seen a miraculous catch of fish, to the point where two boats were nearly ready to sink. Also, he saw Jesus in a different light. He saw Jesus as no other person had seen, or he had seen any other person before. And he fell at Jesus' knees and asked him to depart because he recognized what sin he had and how beautiful and perfect Christ was. Well, fortunately, Jesus did not leave him. It was quite the opposite. Jesus stayed. And Jesus does something very beautiful and challenging. challenging for Simon, and that's to leave things behind and to follow him. And of course, we know that the story is Simon Peter did follow Christ. He did leave things behind. He recognized that the fishing boats, that life that he was once living, he was leaving that behind, maybe leaving a little bit of human securities behind, but on a great venture towards something wonderful and beautiful that Christ had promised for him. He said yes. He said yes to leaving the old behind and to follow Christ for something new. Speaking of people who have left things behind and opened their lives to Christ, in October 19th of 2015, Pope Francis canonized Louis and Zélie Martin. Now you might ask, who are Louis and Zélie Martin? They were the first married couple to be declared saints. They also happen to be the parents of Saint Therese of Lisieux. Saint Therese was one of many in her family, a family that did not have an easy task. But let's look at the history or the desires of Zélie and that of Louis. They thought that Christ was calling them, or their lives were going to be served as Zélie as a nun and Louis as a monk. And wouldn't you know that when they applied for the different orders, they were not accepted. They were rejected. They happened to meet, they fell in love, and realized that that was the life that God was calling them to, as a married couple. Saint Therese said of her parents, she later spoke of them and said that they were more worthy of heaven than of earth. Imagine the home that was created for the children. They had 9 children, 4 of which died in infancy. 5 survived, all daughters. They had 5 daughters, of which Therese was one. In their home, Zélie and Louis taught the girls how it was to pray, who God was and the love that he had, and they developed this within their home. And they affected their girls and set them up on a path to where they too loved Jesus, and they too had a life in God. Louis and Zélie thought that they were to be called to serve God through vocations of service in ministry, but rather God redirected them and had them serve as a married couple and to affect their children, giving up something and moving forward to a life in Christ. That's our theme that we're looking at today. So what is God, or what is Jesus calling us to leave behind? For most of us, we're not going to get up and head to a foreign country to assist with the poor or to assist in missionary work. No, we're called in our own environment to maybe give something up, leave it behind, and move forward in the life of Christ. So I would like to offer maybe something as a community we can do here at St. Francis. And I think this is something that could be transforming for not only our parish, but also for our community, and I think in our world. And I think it's something that's desperately needed. It's going to sound simple and trivial, but look at what difference this will make. The one thing that I would suggest that we give up and leave behind is give up gossip. Give up speaking ill or speaking negatively about others. Maybe we can turn it around and put it in a positive light. We'd learn to speak well of others. When we speak of others, we speak well about them. You know, in St. James' letter, he writes, "With the tongue we bless the Lord our Father, and with the tongue we curse men who are made in the likeness of God." This should not be so. Also, Jesus in the gospel reveals, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. So the question would be, would I want others to speak of me the way that I speak of them? So if we focus back on gossip, from a psychological perspective, gossip is an attempt to make us feel better because we point out the faults and failings of others. Maybe we turn things around just a little bit. If we speak well of others, we begin to look at people in a different light. Rather than seeing their flaws, we begin to look for their talents, their skills, their traits, their gifts. We begin to look for Christ in others. We no longer are thinking negatively, but thinking positively. When we do this, we open a window for God. Let me share a quick story. When I was in the corporate world, we were working on trying to identify leaders for different teams. And when we got together to discuss who would be best to take these leadership roles, we began to look at the problems that people had. What would hold them back? We were looking at all of the negative aspects of people. And we would slowly eliminate people until there was just a couple left. And then we chose from that. Isn't that an interesting process where we selected the least non-qualified rather than the best? Rather than seeking out the best traits and who would be able to carry out the task because of their strengths and their skills. Now I must contrast that with a few years ago I had the opportunity to serve on a committee at the diocese where we made recommendations to the bishop on where clergy, priests and deacons could or should serve different parishes. The conversation seemed to always evolve around the skills and the talents that each person would bring to the community in need. We didn't talk about the negative aspects. It's not that they weren't there. Certainly they're there. We're human. We have faults and we have failings. But we focused on the good of the individual. And watching this action take place, I began to see these words of leaving the gossip behind as making sense, where we focus on the good of others. So maybe we can begin this task of putting gossip behind and moving towards positive comments. And if we're speaking about people, we talk about them in a positive light. Maybe we do this in two simple ways. The first would be to remember that if we don't have anything nice to say, we what? Don't say anything at all. Zip it. And I must admit, my mother told me this many times, many times. If we don't have anything to say, nice to say, don't say anything at all. What does that mean? It means we have to think about what we're going to say, judge whether or not it's a life-giving statement, and then let the words fly. So we have to think about what we're going to say before we say it. We have to judge the quality of our speech before we let it come from our mouths. But more than just giving up gossip, if we replace this with making sure that we talk about positive traits of others and point out their goodness, point out their gifts, we begin to see God in each person because we're looking for that good. So to sum it up, the two steps towards leaving gossip behind is we hold our tongues when we're tempted to gossip, and even more importantly, we pick out positive points. So this week, we have 7 days. Let's pick out one person per day where we consciously think about finding that goodness, that gift that they possess, and thinking about that. And if you have the courage and the strength to say to that individual that gift that you see, the gift of kindness, the gift of humor, whatever the gift may be, let them know that you recognize that. You begin to see life through positive light, as well as those who hear the kind word being said about them. Now, isn't that a way to transform our community? Let's ask Christ today in this Mass to help us speak as he would speak. We'll discover the joy of leaving gossip behind and following him.